All right, guys, today we're gonna build a bay roof. Give you a little look. Just got a 12 pitch. I have a brick rack. There's brick on this wall, so there's a small flat spot right here. That's not even gonna be a factor because it's gonna end up being basically where the brick goes. So I'm just working off of this point. Pretty normal bay. So what I'm gonna do to get all of my information is I'm basically just gonna take half of this, since it should be the same on both sides. I'll verify that, but half of this, I'll take the dimensions to the wall, to this wall, not to this wall. So I'll project this down, measure over to get my run. And basically I'm not gonna draw out the whole bay. I just have half of it. This is the center line. So it should be the same over there. I only really need to draw this side in order to get my hip numbers and enough to get going here. So let's get started. Okay, so what we want to do is find out where this hip is going to go. So you can lay out any shape here if you know the dimensions. Like, let's say you knew this corner was offset by 32. You could draw it out. You don't need to know what this angle is in order to find out your hip number here. And the way you do that is by bisecting the angle. I know this is a 45, so I also know it's a 22.5 degree hip. But in case you didn't, here's an easy way to do it. Just mark the same number off the corner of your angle. And then you just pivot off that point to the middle. Lost you. Okay, so both of these nails are the same distance from the corner. So now we just go like this, we swing an arc. Go over to the other nail, swing an arc. And where those two intersect, that should be equal angles on both sides. So the intersection of this point to there will be my hip. So now I'll snap a line through there, and that will give me the run for my hip. All right, so I have my wall line. I have my hip out to the corner of my plates. I just drew this out. It was 24 1/8 from the wall to the plate. I measured from the center over to there, and then again at the wall from the center over to there. Laid out my angles. And now I know where my hip hits on the wall, how far from the center. I'll be able to locate that now. It's a 12 pitch, so I'll know that however far in I go, that's how high up I'll go. Same rise and run on a 12 pitch. So I'm gonna be 24 1/8 plus however much heel I put on the rafter. So I'll probably do like a 4.5 inch heel height on the rafter, and then it'll go up the additional height, same as your run. But what I did need to know is the run of my hip rafter. And again, you can do the math on this if you know that it's for sure 22.5 or whatever, if you know the angle for sure. But if you don't know the angle, you could lay it out this way, bisect the angle, snap a line, measure it. 26 1/8 is the run. We can do that on a calculator as well. If you imagine this is a right triangle right there with a 22.5 degree angle in the middle. So let's say I knew for sure this was a 22.5. I would set my pitch 22.5 pitch. Zoom in here. I have a 24 1/8 inch run. That's the run. 24 1/8, 22.5 degree angle. Now I hit the diagonal, 26.11. So 26 1/8, more or less. I measured 26 1/8, laying it out this way. So appears to be a 22.5. So there's two ways that you can figure out the angle of your hip. So when I cut this hip rafter, it's going to come to the wall. It's going to be on a 22.5 degree bevel. If the math told me something different, again, that would just be my bevel. It would tell me what it is. And you can do the same thing by just putting a square on here, measuring your rise and run, and that will kind of like, if you enter that into a calculator, rise and run, hit the pitch button, it'll tell you what the angle of your hip is. So kind of a geometric / calculator hybrid model here, but the more ways I run the numbers, the more certain I can be, especially if this was something really critical that I, could only do it one time. It had to be perfect. I want to make sure I don't fuck up. I might lay it out geometrically, cross-check all my numbers on the calculator, make sure both are producing the same thing, and make sure I'm understanding the problem correctly. So now we'll lay out our hip, and I'll show you that. Okay, there's my hip. This was the center line that I snapped. I just went 3/4 each way. This is where it meets the wall. And I'm gonna run a ledger into the side of it. I like to do this fully into the wall because then I don't have to deduct my ledger. I can just mark out this point on the wall by coming up on a 12 pitch. I come up the same height as my run. So I'll just snap a line on that wall, 24 1/8 plus my heel height. Measure from the center line over, and I'll be able to locate this point really easy. But when it comes to cutting this hip rafter, I need to know what the pitch is. And so now that I was able to establish the run, I know the rise because it's going to be the same rise as my common rafter, so I can enter that into my calculator. 24 1/8 run, 26 1/8 rise. The pitch turns out to be a 47.28. So now I can mark that out on a rafter. I know the plumb cut. I know the rafter length. I just have to add my heel height and everything will be nice and easy. The last thing I need to do is figure out the backing angles. This is just going to be cut on a 22.5 degree bevel, like that, where it meets the wall, on a 42 7/8 slope. Yeah, backing angles next. Okay, now for the super confusing part. This is how you use geometric development to determine backing angles. So you have to have your hip line established, your plate line, your wall line, all the things have to be drawn out. You've come this far. You have to have your hip rafter drawn out, which I have, right? And this is just the rise. Same rise as the commons will be on your hip, right? So you square off the center of your hip line until you hit your plate. If this was a different plate angle here, say it was steeper or a different pitch, I would extend this line all the way through. But because it's the same on both sides, I only have to do one side of it. So I draw that line first, okay? Then from that point, I square off of the slope line, okay? So again, this is my hip rafter. If you were to stand that triangle up, it would be the hip rafter. So I'm just squaring off of the slope until that meets my arbitrary point here. This could have been anywhere. It would work out the same geometrically. I could have squared off right here, drew this line, and then squared off of this, point wherever it hit. Doesn't matter. So I run that square back to there, and whatever that ends up being, it's like 4 1/4. I then swing that arc. I swing that arc all the way up to the peak, or not to the peak, but till it hits the center line. Okay? So again, there's a lot of little squaring things happening here. Square off of this line. Then I square back to that line off of the slope. Then I take that number, swing an arc till I hit the middle, okay? This gives me the angle. Basically, if you were to take this rafter, stand it up and cut a slice through it, it would look like this as a plumb cut. So now you can do it 2 ways. This angle right here tells you your backing angle. You can put a square on there and literally just see where you're at. I'm at like a little bit past 15. It says 75, but I mean, that's 15 degrees over. Or you could do it the hard way, the easy way, depending on whether or not you like calculators. Measure the bottom, measure the rise, hit it in there, hit your pitch button. So I don't remember what I had. I'll go through it with you in case you don't understand what I'm saying. Measure that. I think it was 15 and a 16th. So I go 15.0625. Run. I had 4 1/4 on the rise. 4.25 rise. I hit the pitch button and it says, it's Dusty, sorry guys, lives in tool bags, 15.67. So my backing angle, my BA, is 15.76 or 16. That's probably about as accurate as I can get. But you also don't have to back your hips if you don't want to. That's fine. If you like doing subpar craftsmanship, who am I to stop you? But no, it just makes everything easier because now I can actually line up this. You'll see when it gets marked on the wall how smoothly all this stuff comes together because I'm able to put the backing angles on it. So I know my slope, I know my backing angles, I know my run. I can actually measure the diagonal as well to get the length of my rafter. And now I'm going to cut these 2 hips, mark them out on the wall, put in my ledger, and then I only have one more tricky rafter to do right here with a funky bevel. The rest will just be common rafters, easy peasy. I think most people know how to do that. But all right, now I'm going to cut backing angles on this board. Just wanted to show you guys how easy this was for people who complain about shit about backing angles. I'm just going to draw a line on here, a line on the other side to make sure they're the same. I'm going to go a 1/2 inch in. On the other side, I'll do the same. Draw a line a 1/2 inch in. And I'm just going to run my saw along that on both sides. Here we go. There it is, that easy. Run a backing angle. Now, I'm gonna mark out my my 42 and 7, 42.76, basically 43. Hard to see anything here. 43-degree angle. I'll mark that. Okay, now I'll cut this on a 22.5-degree angle because the hip is hitting the wall at a 22.5-degree angle. Now I'll pull off of this point to find my number right here. So from there to here, that's the length of my rafter. I'll transfer that onto here. So where the center of my rafter hits the corner of the wall, you can see how the notch will be projected out just a little bit past the wall, right? But it'll hit it in the corner. So I want to make sure that my number I pulled, which is this number, I'll square it out to the end of my board and mark my plumb cut from there. So with the double cheek cut here on the end, you just saw me drop this number over 7 inches over, 7 1/8, as I marked out there. And then all you're gonna do is just square that across the top and mark the same cut here. And you'll just cut a bevel going opposite directions, like that. So all you have to do is just square cut that over, double bevel it. Okay, next step's a little bit confusing, but again, pull off the peak to here, mark my line. But notice that when I square over, I'm a little bit off the wall. So I want to make sure that I'm not setting my heel height off of this point past the wall. I want to set it to the heel height where it meets the wall. So where it meets the corner, where it meets the wall, they're a little bit offset, right? But there should both be the same heel height. So what we do, pulled my number from the peak, mark the center, I square over, and then what I'm going to do is square perpendicular to that. So this is my pitch. I'm going to square perpendicular to that and make another mark. So I brought this line over, and I brought it over the same increment right here, because this is looking at a plumb line or a level line. So this is also a level line. 5/16 back, and then I drew another line down. I want to make sure that whatever I choose for my heel height is set off this point right here, not right here, because if I go right here, it'll be off, it'll be too low. So we set the heel height off of this point. I'm going to go with 4.5 inches, and then I'll square out to the first line again. So this reference line right here is just used to establish where the seat cut is. But we take the seat cut all the way through to the plumb line, because the plumb line is the center of the wall, okay? And what you should notice is, well, it's hard to see, but basically it's 4.5 here, and if you were to draw a level line over, it would also be 4.5 in the center, just like this. All right, so another noteworthy consideration, when you determine your heel height, you're also raising and lowering your pine line. So if you have a window in play here, which I do, so depending on how tall I make this is going to influence how big the trim is above my window. So when I do this, I usually like to set my heel height in such a way that I know I have an easy piece of trim here. Maybe I can set it right at 5.5 to put a 1x6 there. Whatever, it's not super important, but you can, how do you determine your heel height? Well, you do what's convenient for your next move, right? So you can do an arbitrary number and just sabotage yourself, or you could draw it out real quick, figure out, draw your 12 pitch, draw your overhang length, draw your fascia, square down, square back, draw your wall. All these numbers are available to you to draw out on a picture, half scale or full scale, and figure out what the best heel height is for you. I built like 6 of these houses and I know the heel height's 4.5, so that's why we're going with that. So I am going to be 4.5 inches off the wall. God, this thing is hard to see. 4.5 inches off the wall, off the plate, all the way out to here. And we also have an overhang to do. So you can step this off the wall as well, draw it out here, or you can set your tail long, snap a line, cut it off when it's in place. Lots of ways to do that. I prefer to draw it out, so next I'll draw where the overhang is and actually take a number here to see how long this tail needs to be in order to catch my overhang. There's my fascia. I just have a 2x6 sub fascia, 8 inches, measured from this point to where it meets the inside of the fascia. That'll be the inside of my bevel of a 22.5 here on the plumb cut. It was 7 1/8. So now I use the secondary line that I drew, right? I don't want to measure off of this line. I want to measure off of the line that's a little further back, which is right here. So we'll align that to that mark. We're going to mark 7 1/8, which I've already done. And we'll drop another plumb cut on there. One sec. Maybe throw a little blanchard cut on there as well. You guys are used to using these lines. All squares, most framing squares have these lines on there. That perpendicular line to the blade, that's for you to just line up and be able to make a square cut. So I'll nip the tail off that because I know it'll stick below my soffit if I don't. And that's it, one hip rafter. Just like that. Okay, so now it's time to get these hips put on the wall. Keeping in mind that this triangle right here represents where the wall line meets the roof line. Right? So right here, where the wall line meets the roof line. So I'm gonna be 24, I'm gonna be the same distance out or I'll be the same distance up as I am out because it's a 12 pitch. And if it was any other pitch, you would just do the math. If it was an 8-12, you would take your run, figure out your rise. But 12-12 is really easy to work with. So I'm gonna be the same distance off the wall. I'll be that way up, and I'm gonna add my heel height to that, which was 4.5. So I'm gonna end up snapping a line on the wall at 28 5/8. Got my 4.5 inches of my heel height plus the rise of my rafter. I'm gonna snap that line on the wall. I'll take my rafter, put it on the corner like so. I have my line snapped on the wall, which is 28 5/8 up. Now all I'll do is just bring this until it planes with the blue line. Made a mark on there where it already hit. I'll nail it to the wall. I'll do the same thing for the other side. Set it on the corner, bring it in until it planes with my blue line. And I'm off to the races. All right, so I have my hips installed. I measure from the center of my drawing, which is the center of the bay, over where the ledger meets the hip. I'm measuring to the short point. Take that number, double it. I think it ended up being like 63 or something. And then I'm gonna bevel it on a 45-degree angle because it's a 12 pitch. That's gonna look like that. So my hip. The ledger tying into my hip. That's just how I like to set these up. Then the next piece will be this board going down the edge of the wall here. And that is actually relative to this, it's a 45-degree angle. So this is a real hip. Real hips are, or regular hips, sorry, not real, they're all real. A regular hip is on a 45-degree angle. So this will be a regular 12 pitch hip. And it will also be the backing angle of a regular 12 pitch hip. So I happen to know that's 30 degrees, but I'll show you a scenario where you don't even know what this angle is. You can draw it out geometrically just by knowing the dimensions. Draw it out geometrically. We'll be able to project out, figure out what the angle is, and also figure out what the backing angle is. So that'll be next. All right, got my rafter drawn out. Measure from the long point. Sorry, not the long point. The center point of the hip. That to the corner of my wall will be my run, because that will be the furthest point out on my notch. Bird's mouth notch will be all the way out to that furthest point. I don't notch it on a bevel or nothing silly like that. I just notch it right here. You just have to make sure that you have enough seat cut to land on the wall there, because it is going to come away from the wall. Thank God that shut off. So yeah, the rise, do the same rise. Let's see this triangle. Right triangle coming off this point. Same height, because it's all the same rise meeting at that point. So it's 24 1/8 up, down to there. And like I said, this should be just a regular hip 12, because this board relative to this, relative to that wall, is a 45. So on a framing square, hip 12 is a 17-12. You can see we're right about there. Just drawn out geometrically here. So we are cutting a rafter that is a hip 12, 17-12. I'll cut it on a 22.5. And then I'll make a horizontal deduction off the plumb cut this length. So I will shorten the rafter this far. And I'll show you that next. All right, we're gonna find backing angles. So you always square off the hip until you hit the eave line, like that. Next, we're gonna square off the slope back to our starting point. So this is the slope. The slope of this triangle. Squaring off the slope. Back to the origin point of my first line. Take that number. Whatever that length is, and I will pivot it and transfer it back down to here. So this number, swing and arc, again from that point. Okay, so we swung that arc 6 inches over. That's what it was, 6 inches. Swung the radius back to here. Now I'm going to connect that point to my eave line. So again, square off your hip, square off your slope back to your start point, take that number, pivot it, and then connect it to your eave. If it sounds complicated, it's because it really fucking is. But that's how you do it. Now I have this backing angle triangle. This is basically a slice of the slope. Put my square on there, line it up. You can see it's 30, which is the backing angle of a hip, a regular hip 12. So that's the secret to these bays. Calculate your 22.5 hips. If you have 45-degree walls, this will just be regular hip math, or you can draw it out geometrically like I did. Take your run off your plan view and just do a regular calculation, but you also know your rise, so it's really easy to do. You just put in your rise, your run, that'll tell you your slope, your diagonal, everything. Now we'll mark it out on a board. I already have the backing angle kind of going on here, but we'll mark it out together. So this is gonna basically hit right into that hip, like so, sharing the slope of this wall, 90 degrees. All right, I have this hip drawn, I have this hip drawn out here. There's a triangle. So this is the diagonal. I can measure that, transfer that to my board. Use all right, so again, I drew this triangle, which represents this hip rafter. I can take the diagonal off here, or I can just measure the run and do a regular rafter calculation like that. I mark it out on my board, which again, this is plan view. So when I measure horizontally, I'm measuring horizontally, right? If I have to make a deduction, like this distance, I'm going to measure back horizontally while this is plumb, right? Which means measuring over 3/4 of an inch here and then taking that much off, because this is, again, top-down view. So my triangle was drawn I drew from this point. My rise and run calculations came from this point. I'm just showing you how to do a deduction. You don't have to do a deduction. You could take your run off of here and do the math that way as well. So I marked that out. This point where this meets at the wall will be 4.5. So be 4.5. Sorry, right here. It'll be 4.5 right here. As you come straight out, it's going to be lower because it's sloped, but it should also be 4.5 as it steps back in. So I'll make sure to mark it out on the correct side. My point is, if you pulled a plumb cut here on the wrong side and you marked 4.5, you would end up too tall. So it needs to be 4.5 heel height, which is the heel height of all my rafters. Sorry if I missed that information. 4.5. And then I just did a small calculation to catch my fascia number, projecting this fascia line out and measuring how far out it was to the long point. Once I knew the run, basically if I project this out from the corner of the wall to where it meets at about 9 inches. So that becomes a horizontal 9, because the view again is from the view is from the top down. So 9 inches is this way from plan view. So from that wall line, I'll measure over 9, mark that, cut a 45 back. Bingo, bango. Now I make my deduction, cut that at 22.5, and then I go nail it to the damn old wall over there now. Alrighty, we're nearing the end. Things are coming together. You can see why I like to bevel these, put backing angles on it, because the math is really simple to draw out based off this point. Connect the hip right there. Everything else can plane into it. Super simple. You can see how the short point of this goes right to that point of the wall. So at that point, it's going to be 4.5 inches of heel height. At this point, it'll be 4.5 inches of heel height. Same as this. Everything came off our center line over to our point. Our height was determined from the run. You just use your pitch to calculate your rise. That's your blue line on the wall. So now I'll put one rafter here in the middle. I'll put a couple commons on. These common rafters will be really easy to lay out. You'll just use your run minus 1.5 inches for the thickness of your ledger. So I'll use a 12 pitch run. Or I'm sorry, I use the 12 pitch to calculate the run based off of, it was 24 1/8 from outside of wall to this wall. So it'll be 22 5/8. That'll be the run. On a 12 pitch, it'll tell me the diagonal. I'll throw a few commons in. For this one, since there's only one layout, I can just pick an arbitrary number. Try to put a rafter half-ass in the middle of this thing. So I'll just cut a rafter that's like, I don't know, 16 inches, say. It'll end up being somewhere in the middle here. I don't really care where it is. I'll just butt the bird to the wall and slide it until it planes. Make sure it's square. Nothing complicated there. All line up. Pretty close. Well, there you have it. So now we just run our fascia on there, make sure it's level, and we're all done. If you guys have questions or got confused watching my long ass video, hit me up in the comments.